Okay, can we get started, please? I had a number of things I was going to say tonight, and I've forgotten what they were now. I didn't make a note of them. I've been terribly busy overhauling some stuff on my computer. But what I noticed on the... Oh, don't record this, by the way. Don't. What I noticed on the computer and the television, rather, with regard to the elections, talk about lack of logic. I don't care who's talking or what they're talking about. But there's an argument from innuendo. Argument from innuendo means that you're really presupposing something which may or may not be true. I hear that again and again and again. And we all know what Bush is like, you know. Everybody assumes we don't need that again. That sort of assumption. Nobody speaks out what is exactly wrong. They just assume there's something wrong. And I hear this from a lot of commentators. I hear it from the certain candidates. I hear it from all over the place. Logic is missing today. Yeah. Don't misunderstand my words when I said about Bush. All I'm saying is that's an example of what they're doing. They say we don't want 8 more years of that again. But 8 more years of what? Nobody says what they're talking about. I remember a young woman in Ottawa. One of my students, I was teaching graduate nurses, and these were anywhere from 26 to 60 years of age. And one of them invited me to her home. One of the first things she said with the parents present, something about, the kids want change. That's what we want. We don't want the past, we want a change. Oh, why, what's wrong with the past? Silence. Not a word. And what do you want to change to? She didn't know. These are like mantras. It's the television station, and it's you hear a bias here and a bias there. It's frightening when you see that. But this is a reflection of the lack of education in the schools and especially in the universities.
Amen.
I've been many years on this continent now, teaching in universities, and I'm horrified. If you studied my ethics course, you'll see how systematically we developed a course. Ghislain Charon, when I was teaching in the French university, was a good friend of mine. But his students told me, went into the classroom, he's teaching ethics. What do we talk about today? No preparation. What do we talk about today? Divorce, capital punishment, abortion, euthanasia. Well, in my courses, as you may have seen, those that studied ethics with me, is every one of those, or each one of those particular topics has its proper place in the science of ethics. And it's developed systematically. If you think that's unique, that's not unique. That's the way philosophers always taught it. Till the chaotic days of the 60s, when weak-kneed professors were too afraid to develop things and commit themselves. As one of the priests who was in the Institute of Medieval Studies in Toronto said to me, nobody wants to take a position today. I said, I do, and they can go to hell if they don't like it. So, this is the sort of thing that they're all afraid to commit themselves and deal with the thing systematically. One of my classmates in Montreal when I studied there, Claude Lagadec, French-Canadian of course, and Claude couldn't see the simplest things in philosophy. And a Dominican father teaching us metaphysics, Claude objected to the principle of causality. Not actually rejecting it outright, but saying, how do we know it's true? Well, if one of you asked me that, I'd demonstrate on the board how it could not be untrue. It must be true. I'd prove it to you. But all he got was from the good Dominican father was, c'est un principe, il faut l'accepter. It's a principle, you must accept it. A principle of reason, you must accept it. That's built on faith, not on reason. I've stressed this 100 times to you, that we don't believe philosophy, we prove it. I wish we had recorded all that now. You've got it? Sorry. I'll start again. You got it all? Good. Yes, good work. Well, let's get started now. But by the way, make sure I'm getting people's names pop up and the computer says it's been rejected, the message I've sent to you. Please communicate with me and let me know if something's wrong. Have you changed your address? I found 1 or 2 people have changed their addresses and didn't tell me. So, let's get back to where we were. We saw the life of plants. First of all, the general principles of life. The life amongst plants, then the life amongst animals. We're working through that now. But we've come to the special thing that's about animals that plants don't have, namely knowledge. Dogs see a rabbit run by. Birds can see a snake and jump on it, like the kookaburra, something like that. They can always hear things, and we speak sometimes as if they've got sixth senses. Got a sense that can sense things that we can't see. How? With acute hearing, acute smell, and acute sight, etc. Acute and acute. The first big problem we ran up against was almost like a conflict. Knowledge is in the knower, but it's about something outside the knower. How do they come together? We went through that and saw there are 2 ways of having form. Now, form is what makes a thing be what it is. Form is the inside fixer. What inside a thing fixes it to be what it is. The form, which is the shape of a table. The outside fixer is the carpenter. He's outside the thing which fixes it to be what it is. But the inside fixer is the form in the thing. So then, how does that form get from the tree, for instance, into my mind? A big problem. The first really great problem in philosophy. Especially when it comes to be the universal. Not just this tree, but every tree. That's a great problem for you. However, we're going to solve those problems. So, the form, there are 10 modes of form, as I showed you. One is that makes it be the kind of substance it is, substantial form. The other 9 are things that belong to substances. For instance, shape, colour, etc., etc. We saw there were 9 forms of them. So what makes the tree be a tree is what must make me be knowing a tree. It determines that this wood is a tree. Well, what determines that wood to be the wood of a tree must also determine my knowledge. Fix it up. My powers of knowledge are what we call potencies. Sight, for instance. I can see this extended red, that extended blue, this extended white. Sight is potential to all these things, purely potential. It's made actually seeing the red of the jacket by the very jacket itself. It not only makes it be a red jacket, but it makes me be knowing a red jacket. We're talking generally about the theory of knowledge. So, according to itself, sight is no colour. It's not determined to be or fixed to be any colour at all. It's fixed by that. If something is transparent, you wouldn't be able to see it. You wouldn't be able to see it. We can't see the oxygen of the air because it doesn't have any colour. So if something makes no sound, we don't hear anything. I mentioned that, I think, last class. In that movie about the ants in Brazil, I think it was. They were listening in the jungle. Something's wrong. What's going on? The girl got out of bed. Her husband-to-be and the district commissioner were out in the air listening. And this woman was startled and didn't know why. Got out, she said, "What's wrong? I can't hear anything." They said, "That's just the problem. There's nothing to hear." And in a jungle at night, well, there's something to hear because there are a lot of night animals. But when there's nothing, were disturbed. I think I mentioned the experiment tried in Australia when they had a man lying in bed, a clock just like this one, and they had no sound, absolutely no sound. And he couldn't see out through the glass window, but the experimenters could see him. And his mind became distorted because no sound. And if we're in a soundless area, apparently they found by experiment that it starts to distort our other senses. We think we hear things, we think we see things, and even the clock, he said, started to leer at him and sort of went all wiggly. So that form gets into us. Somehow we make a model of that tree out there in our senses. And whereas the form makes the tree be physically a tree, it doesn't make me be physically a tree when I see the tree. I'm above the physical order. I don't form a compound with the tree. My powers of knowledge don't compound with it. For instance, if the tree got into my mind, I say, oh, that's a tree out there, and it formed a compound with my mind, I'd say, how much comes from the tree and how much comes from the mind? We don't know. And that's what the Second and First World Wars were about, indirectly. Because Kant followed foolish Englishmen, David Hume in particular, followed them and thought that the tree and my mind form a third thing, a compound of the two. Result is, I don't know how much comes from the tree or how much comes from the knower. We'll see more of that later. So that is why Europe went into idealism. Nothing's real outside the mind. All I know is these compounds, these thirds in my mind. They call them the phenomenon, at least Kant did. He started the fashion of calling it the phenomenon. The noumenon is the tree out there. The thing in itself. Der Ding an sich, they said in German. The thing in itself. Am I right, Joe? Thank you. He's the expert in German here. He's a teacher of German. Well, they thought we can't know the thing in itself. We can only know what's in the mind. So you can imagine how all these contemporary theories about, science, the religion of science, that it's all in your mind, you know. What's it called again?
Scientology?
Scientology, yes. So there's something else too. I can't think what it's called again.
Moral relativity?
No, that's the philosophical terms, but there's another one.
Christian Science?
Christian Science, that's it. And I can remember a friend of mine in Australia, he was quite upset about this. His grandmother said, you haven't got a toothache, it's all in your mind. Yeah, well, I'll swap the toothache with you and your mind. Something like that. He said, you can have the toothache and I'll have the mind. Ridiculous. Because we don't know anything that's out there.
That's Maya too. That's the Hindu Maya, that we don't know. Everything is illusion. Everything is in our mind.
It's very much the Eastern thing.
Eastern thing.
Yeah.
Very
Very much so. I had to examine an Indian priest on one occasion for his master's degree. I was on the committee where they have to pass an oral exam. And, oh boy, was he in a mess. Too much influence by the Indian. From India I'm talking about now, but the Eastern generally, they tend to be rather transcendent in their thinking about some of these things. So the solution is that we manufacture within us as an image of the thing out there, but the form we take from out there and put within us, our powers of knowledge, even up to the intellect, we manufacture them, but we have that form in a new way. That is to say, above the physical order, not compositively and purely objectively. So that's the solution. There are two ways of having form. That way out there is one way, and I've got that all for you on page 20. So then, the act of knowledge. It's an immanent act. We do the act, we benefit from the act. It's an immanent act. We are the agent and we are the patient. We're the doers of the act and we benefit from the act. When I look at the clock doesn't know a darn thing about me doing this. But I'm manufacturing within myself a copy of it, or an image of its likeness, if you like. And that then is used by me, but it's in an objective way, not the subjective way. So then, the act of knowledge is an immanent act. The whole of what is known comes from the tree. The whole of how it is known comes from me. Either it there determines my knowledge, or I couldn't have the knowledge at all. You can even experiment it this way. Now, I'd love to see a giraffe sitting here, but I can't do it. Try as I may. He'll fix it so that I see him, not a giraffe. So what is known is determined by the knower. How it is known is determined by the knower. I'm sorry, I said that the wrong way, I think. Yeah. Yes, what is known is fixed by the known, and how it is known is fixed by the knower. I can see him, or I can understand his humanity, etc. So more of that as we go along. Now the intentionality, the stretching of the mind, the stretching of sight. Intentionality. Tendere in Latin means to stretch, and that's where we get that word from. Intentionality, the form in my mind, or in my sight, or in my hearing, makes me stretch out to the thing itself. We call that the intentionality of knowledge. This is all forced upon us by reality. Deny it, and you're in trouble. There are only three philosophies, ultimately. Only three. One of them says we're purely passive. We don't do anything. Another one says we're purely active. We create the object. But the only sensible, reasonable philosophy, which was presented to us by Plato, Socrates, Plato, because most of Plato's writing, or at least half of it, was originated from Socrates, all the dialogue section. The more prose sections later on in his life all came from his own pen. Socrates didn't write anything. And from the time of Aristotle to the present day, we deny one of those, we deny the truth of what we're saying, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. So the intentionality of knowledge means that the knower knows the known. And we show in that part of metaphysics we call epistemology, we did a little smattering of that last course. We defend that. We show how it must be true. And we saw that, in other words, form is the reason of knowledge. It's a certain immateriality. Not the matter, but the form is the reason of knowledge. We saw there are different degrees of knowledge, especially sense knowledge and intellective knowledge. Sense knowledge means we know this individual material thing here and now. That's sense knowledge. Of course, when you get into memory, it's in the past. But what we always see, feel, hear, taste, smell is this or that or the other, the individual. But the intellect, it has as its object the universal. The intellect, we'll see this later when we come to the intellectual part. I'm just making out the difference between the two at the moment. But the intellect knows not this person, but human persons in general, universal. The word universal is an interesting word. It comes from three Latin words. Unum versus alia. One towards others. Sorry, that's a U there. It doesn't look like, but it's supposed to be a U. One towards others. Here's the one, man. Here are the others, Joe, Mary, Bob, etc. It's a block of reality that has a relationship to others. That's the word means, universal. One block of reality relating to or towards others. All humanity. Whatever the intellect knows, it knows universally. Even a great French philosopher like Jacques Maritain, he made a mistake there. It went wrong. In 1936, He wrote this, and I was in bed with the flu in London, England, and I read it for the first time. I couldn't get back to Woodbury quick enough to say, I read what Maritain said. He said the intellect can know the individual. He said, that's right, 1936. He deviated. I wondered how a man of his greatness could fall for such a thing. So anyway, the intellect always knows not just this piece of red cloth, but redness universally, or cloth universally, or red cloth universally. But it knows the universal always. So there are 2 degrees of knowledge. Then we got speaking about the sensitive knowledge. First of all, as found in brute animals, that's to say non-rational animals. And then we'll deal with the same subject concerning man. This is on page 23. So we saw that there were 5 external senses, and we saw there are 4 internal senses. So we've got here, say, sense consciousness. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 external senses. Touch here and sight here. Remember, we saw a gradual immaterialization. Gradual immaterialization. In touch, you have to know the very presence of the thing. Sight can know the thing at a distance. Hearing, taste. Taste is also a little bit of touch in that. These are all modifications of the sense of touch, all these 5 external senses. Now, sense consciousness has a storehouse called imagination. Well, it stores up all the things that's known. Then we saw that there's another sense called the estimative sense. Tonight we're going to explore some of these a little bit more. And its storehouse, sensitive memory. I was looking at my spelling. I hate writing on these boards. I'd rather write on a blackboard with chalk, to be honest with you. With my experience of these things, I don't take it too long. So, what is the object of sight? Extended colour. What's the object of hearing? Bodies as soundy. The estimative sense estimates. You might say a bird has sense consciousness. It knows it's seeing things or it's touching something. It knows the difference between seeing a worm and eating the worm. It stores all these past images in its imagination. But the estimative sense makes a sort of a concrete judgment. Practical prudence. Natural prudence, Aristotle called it. The virtue of prudence, as we'll see later, concerns making judgments here and now. The prudent person sort of looks out and say, well, I go to Buffalo, there's heavy snow out there, I'll have to think about it and weigh the pros and the cons. Prudence always concerns actions to be done here and now. I had a very good friend. He was a brilliant mind, wonderful mind. But he wouldn't know whether to hold his hat on his head in the wind or what to do. Normal practice. I've seen him stand downtown with me saying, what do? We have supper in here tonight? We go to a movie, what do we do? I don't know what to do, he says. I said, good God, he's like a child. He was well known amongst his colleagues, really like that. I was his closest friend. Oh, boy, sometimes it was quite a job to have to put up with the poor fellow. But he could not make a prudent judgment. He could not decide ever what to do here and now. He had to always be reassured that he was doing the right thing. So, estimative sense makes a kind of a concrete judgment here and now. So it knows the worm as something pleasant. It knows the fire as something harmful. So it has to decide between 2 things, the pleasant and the harmful. And stores that in sensitive memory. You can imagine a lamb, for instance, will see the wolf, and sort of the wolf that tore its mother apart in its youth, let's say. Tore the lamb's mother, that is to say, of course. But then you can look at it from the wolf's viewpoint. A lamb, yummy. You see, 2 different ways of looking at it. We call those acts instinct. They're an inbuilt plan of action, but we'll have more to say about that after. So that's what the instinct is. It's a sort of an inbuilt plan of action. And it has a certain inclination towards things known as pleasant and things known as harmful. So powers are distinguished from one another inasmuch as their acts are different, and acts derive their species from their objects. The power of sight is distinguished by its act, vision, and it's distinguished by its act, extended colour. You even got me writing American. Now look at that. C-O-L-O-U-R. My brother says, you're just another bloody Yank. But he loved it when he was over here. He enjoyed people's company very much. So, the sensitive memory, it recalls things from the past as harmful and as pleasant. That's how it differs from imagination. Now, what's the object of each one of these? It's very easy to see them, but what's the object of sense consciousness? Its object is the actions of the other senses. So it knows, it tells the knowing, the knower, whether it's imagining something or whether it's actually seeing something. Sometimes when we're sick, of course, there's a little bit of a difficulty there. It can be, especially if you're under the affluence of Hinkerhol. Oh, I'm sorry, you're stinking with drinking. Well, that you might have difficulty with these things. But you'll know from bitter experience that somebody who's maybe sick, and they'll make judgments here and against all good common sense, because the whole thing, the organs, these interior senses, are all organs of the organ is in the cortex of the brain. So when the brain is upset with the whole body being sick, they'll make bad judgments. They'll make the kind of judgment where, I don't give a damn what anybody says. I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to do this or something else, Or they'll make, like the man one night right next to me, he was too. I was sort of just inside this big bus in Sydney, and this was the buses back, the Second World War, etc., where they had a platform, a double-decker bus, had a platform there, and this man stepped off the bus at high speed and went straight into a car, which was parked there. Fortunately, the bus was only just picking up. I had to give witness to the protection of the bus driver and conductor there that the man did a foolish thing himself. He made a terribly poor judgment. You'd say, how did he do that? Well, he'd been drinking. It was obvious he was drunk when he was on the bus. So buses are fixed now, so they can't do that. So the important thing to know is this: what is the object of sense consciousness? It makes us conscious of all our operations, external and internal. It's very important, that, sense consciousness. Its action, its operation is to know the actions of the other senses. We can distinguish the senses, or we can compound them too. We can do lots of things like that. We'll come to that presently. Then we started to see the same powers as in man. Now we changed one name because in man it's a little different. The cogitative power. The cogitative sense, or cogitative power. Cogito means to think. I think. So it's called a practical reasoning. What it does, it prepares all this apparatus in here for the intellect to operate. So it'll provide images for the intellect to operate on. Because our thinking is about images in the internal senses. By the way, these are called internal not because they're inside of us, but because they come through the external senses. They're called internal because they come through these. They're secondary, as it were. Yet they're the things, this is what gives us consciousness. We'll see later there's another consciousness in the intellect, which is even superior to this one. But so with man, we call it cogitative, because it organizes images for the thinking powers, under the direction of our intellect, of course. So some people, yeah.
Is all this that you have up there now, the sensitive consciousness, and is that all in the brain?
This from here up is not down to the external senses.
All right.
You see, so the external senses have been
So
the
you're
sight
not
is
saying
the.
it's intellect.
Pardon?
You're not saying it's intellect.
Oh no, I haven't touched intellect yet. The external sense, say sight, its organ is here, but the cogitative power, its organ is in here, in the brain. And there's a distinction between the power and the organ. Never overlook that. Big distinction. The power, when you're not operating, the organ's still there. When the power is operating, it uses the organ. So because the intellect is present in man, now he's vastly superior to the animals. Vastly superior. We'll see more of that as we go along. I remember Dr. Little, a biochemist in Sydney University, said one time, "Oh, there's only just a slight difference between man and a brute animal." I'll go the other way and I'll say it's infinite. The difference is infinite. One is just finite. You can tell what its nature is from its operation. Do follows be. In other words, its operation follows its nature. It does be a cat, so it'll do like a cat. But the power and the organ are two principles of one act of knowledge, one act of knowing. Now, because intellect is present, now in man, we're dealing with man now, remember? We can do a number of things which brute animals cannot do, because they haven't got intellect. You see, they're just enslaved to reality, accidental things in reality. Oh, there's a hare running there. Oh, yes, he just chases that. But man can study animals. Man can think about animals. I hear people talking about animal rights. Animals don't have rights. We'll see that in ethics. Rights are something following obligations. Well, what obligations have... So we don't just have rights and obligations, as people tell us. We have obligations, then we have rights. Now, supposing here's a couple sitting in front of me here. They have 3 lovely children. And now they've got those children. They've got an obligation now to rear those children. Education, feed, clothing, housing. So that gives them special rights. For instance, they could say to me, "Keep your cotton picking fingers off our children," or "Don't impede our children from having their lessons," etc., etc. So rights are moral powers over others to allow them to carry out their obligations. That's what a right is. You say, "Oh, people have got duties too, you know." Oh, do they? Where the hell do you think they get the rights from? That's where they get their rights. If, for instance, this lady is a teacher of music, now with the children that or the people she's teaching, that gives her special rights. Father Woodbury made this remark, and I'm telling you, he was a genius. He said, "How many votes should a man have?" As many children as he has. He didn't distinguish between the vote that the woman has and his. I don't remember him distinguishing those two. But how many votes should people have? They have 3 children. Maybe they should have 5 votes. They're human persons, those children. So obligations come first and rights come after that. Rights are a moral power with respect to others, to allow them to carry out their duties. So the cogitative power, or rather the intellect, I should say, the intellect works with the sensitive memory. With the intellect and the sensitive memory, we can reminisce. We can try to recall the past. So that gives man a special function that animals do not have. Reminiscence. Gee, what did I do Sunday? Now let me see. Last Friday night I taught class. Saturday I met William Crackenthorpe. I made that up. Saturday night I got drunk. Only kidding.
How many times?
How many times? we were laughing tonight about that. Remember that lady was sitting over here, and Elaine was her name, from Buffalo, and she said something about, I think, right out of the blue this came, it wasn't even near the subject. She said, I think politics, religion and philosophy are all the same thing. Of course, everybody was shocked. I turned and I said, well, I say things like that too when I've had about 7 whiskies. It did stop it dead a bit. So see, we search, we go, this is called reminiscence. And the ideal way to do it is to take the chain of events and try and work either forward to what you did from some past event, or work back from something. That's the way to do it in memory. So we can do that, reminisce under the direction of the intellect. Then in their imagination, creative imagination. That's how somebody who, say, might have facility for telling jokes. You know, some people are tremendous wits. They can come out with a joke at any time, can't they? There's a certain genius in that.
Is this a setup for one?
Would somebody slip over to my home? I have some rat poison. So, the creative imagination. We can say we've never seen gold as big as a mountain. We've never seen a golden mountain, but we've seen mountains and we've seen gold. So we put them together. So people who are great singers, great writers, great art painters, etc., great with electronics, etc. That's all creative imagination used in that. And sometimes we don't know it, but we have to learn about it later in life even. I can remember my friend, one of the wittiest people I've ever known, his name was John Whitty, incidentally, a very wonderful friend of mine in Australia. John, growing up, had trouble. We talked about this together because we both had the same trouble. You frequently could see things, somebody would ask you to do something, and you could see more in what they said than what they knew themselves. And it caused lots of misunderstandings. I don't like to mention names, but I will. A certain little lady that usually sits up about here. You all know her and love her.
Tweety bird.
Pardon?
Tweety bird.
Tweety bird, yes. She doesn't realize that in her sick state. She's being treated with medication that's causing her a lot of psychological problems. And the poor kid just doesn't see. She says the other day about how long are you going to be on the phone? She came to my home allegedly to help me. How long are you going to be on the phone? I thought, well, she wants to make a phone call. But no, she wanted to know, was I finished with the bathroom? But I never thought it's just what she meant with it. It's so easy. I had a long talk to a mother today. She has the same problem with it. She does not see. It's the drugs that she's on, these psychomimetic drugs for the problem she's having. And the poor kid didn't realize what she'd said was ambiguous. Well, we won't go into that. Anyway, creative imagination. This is what men like Beethoven had. Look at those 4 notes, which I use as an example. I found with young people sometimes it's wasted example. They've never heard of Beethoven. Is he the local garbage man? But the 5th Symphony, bum, 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 bum. Boom says nothing, boom says nothing, boom says nothing, boom says nothing. But the 4 notes put together, it's beautiful. A fugue, like all the notes pursuing one another, all down through that symphony. Magnificent. But he saw it, his creative imagination enabled him to see that. So, now let's come to, on page 25, little c, some properties of sensitive life.
So, the intellect, is that the cognitive, the sensitive?
No, we're coming to that later. No, that's separate. Yeah. I've only just mentioned it because it's timely when we're talking about the senses, you see.
Could I ask a question, please, about what you had on the board?
Yeah, please excuse me, I charge $15 a question. Now, what's your second question?
We'll get that later. Good comeback. Cognitive and estimative are distinct.
Now, they're the same thing, but one, cogitative
Well,
is in man only,
Okay.
because of its extra functions, you see?
Thank you, that's what you're.
Good.
okay.
Because all of these extra functions exist because the intellect can work on the internal sense. So, some properties of sensitive light. Now, C1 on page 25. Sense knows its object infallibly. Errors are due to accidental causes. For instance, I might see, although we come to that in just a second. I think, yes, we'll come to that in a minute. Well, let's go to the second one. Oh no, I'm sorry. Back to the first one. I'm jumping. It's off here. Sensation. The external sense is called sensation. But the acts of the internal sense are called perception. They ought to be distinguished properly. Yet perception takes place, of course, with an external sense. So, C2. Sense knows its object infallibly. I cannot see red if there's no red there to be seen. If there is red to be seen and I don't see it, it's either because I'm looking elsewhere or maybe something's been damaged in the organ. Because this power of operation for sight, for instance, goes through the organ. Sense for hearing, the power of hearing works through the organ. So there's two kinds of errors. There's a negative error. Pardon me. I cannot see a tree which is there. I've gone home and I've said, I wonder if Joe McLaughlin was here tonight. I might not see Joe. He's there to be seen, but I may not see him. That's a negative error. But positive, we see a tree which is not there, the sense cannot see red, which is not there. But we can imagine we see red, which is not there. I haven't worded that too well there, I don't think. But a positive error means this. Negative errors we make all the time. Did you see that horse go down the street? Or something like that. No, I didn't see it. But a positive error, we see a tree which is not there, we think. But sense cannot see red, which is not there. But we can imagine we see red, which is not there. So it's always due to another sense. And the one that betrays us a lot is imagination. The mistress of false deduction, or the mistress of false seduction, I think Aristotle called it. Sense will receive the red which is there, but we may be mistaken concerning what the red thing is which has the red. Now, an example of that. I'm in a camp at night. This has actually happened. And we stopped on the road to going somewhere, my family and I, and I was much, much younger, about 105 years ago. And I said, Dad, we built a fire, boil up the billy to make some tea. I said, there's something out there. I said, watch out, it's not a damn snake. It was a little bandicoot. It's like a tiny little rat-like kangaroo. And there was the bandicoot. Came nuzzling up around us looking for food. Because we were all sitting quietly around this fire, it didn't think we were dangerous. So, but we knew there was movement there. I could see a sort of a vague movement. Because coming from where I come from, there's a certain man who shows snakes on Botany Bay. He has every Saturday and Sunday afternoon he shows snakes to people. And he showed us a big, deadly tiger snake on one occasion. He said this was seen going through one of the Sydney suburbs late at night, 12 at midnight. I think it was midnight, he said, if I remember correctly. Well, that scared the hell out of me, to be honest with you, to know snakes will be around at night like that. I always imagine them, since they're cold-blooded animals, they'd be out getting warmed in the sun during the day. But when I saw the movement, my sight detected there was movement, my hearing detected the rustling of leaves, but what that movement and the rustling sound were attached to, that's where we can go wrong. Now, for instance, the imagination fills in, you see. Now, for instance, there's a story in one of the logic books where we determine about how we progress in knowledge. Hey, Joe, there's something out there in the dark. We're sitting around a campfire. Oh, it's an animal. We're getting clearer. Oh, it's Joe. Now we're really clear. We knew there was movement, but what the movement is in. You might say, oh, there comes my sister and there comes your sister down there. They're always in red dresses. But when it gets up there, you find it's somebody you've never seen before. Because your eyes only register the colour. But what the colour is of, you don't know that till you get more knowledge. That's where we can go wrong. What's called the common object. The common object. That's where we can go wrong. I've said all that out there. For instance, here's a common object. Red, you can see the red out there. Maybe common to a deer, a hunter's jacket, a car, the sky, etc. We see the red but mistake what it is in, the common object. For the extended redness may be on a deer or a hunter. This is how accidents happen, of course. It's very interesting to note that the famous cattle judge in Australia, who was blind, was one of the best cattle judges we ever had. And he ran his hands over the cow or whatever it was. He'd feel the tail. Yes, the tail drops correctly. He'd feel under its belly the big milk vein under its belly. Then he'd feel the teats to see if they were hanging down properly, the tail dropped properly. Then he'd say, there's red hair here, there's white hair here. He knew he could detect the fineness of the difference between two colours of hair. It was rather extraordinary. But you may not know it, of course, the Royal Agricultural Society shows the biggest thing in the world. And in Ottawa, I was taken to the Agricultural Society show there, and I was told, oh yes, you'll see horses, you'll see cattle. I said, oh, do we? I said, so later we saw there, I said, how many are there? Oh, probably half a dozen horses. There are 3,000 at the Grand Parade in Sydney. 3,000 horses or cattle altogether, I think it was, at the Grand, and they're not all there. Some didn't want to go in the Grand Parade, where this huge arena where they have the cattle parade. It's, 3 or 4 compared with 3,000 or 4,000. But anyway, so the red, the senses will only sense what their object, the proper object we call it. They won't detect often the common object. We have to wait to get more information to see how we can determine what the red is in, for instance. Imagination can be wrong, as Aristotle said. He made a few comments about imagination. Perception on page 26. Perception of the special objects of sense is always free from error. I hear a sound, or I see a sight, a colour. It's always free from error. If it's there to be seen, then I don't change it. Because this is merely a power. It's moved into act by something which is actual. This is only the can see. The power is a power of can see. Has to be moved into does see by the form of the known. Water from itself is what colour? Neither hot nor cold. But it becomes hot by itself, not by, this is merely canny, we call it, or can be hot. This is does be hot. And it's caused by something which is hot. Remember we saw in metaphysics, nothing can make itself actual. Nothing can actualize itself. This goes from the can state to the does state. Can be hot, does be hot. But it has to be made hot by something which is actually hot. If it could heat itself, it means at the same time it's not hot, at the same time it is hot. That's contradictory. If hot water, but David Hume, the greatest, so-called greatest English philosopher, was too darn dumb to see that. Remember the billiard balls? He couldn't see that the cue caused the billiard ball to hit the other billiard ball. No necessary connection, he said. Boy, the English have been probably the worst philosophers in the history of the world. The Italians, the Spanish, far superior than the Germanic races. far superior. So nothing can actualize itself. the power of sight has to be actualized by something which does be read, not can be read, but does be read. So all these are caused to come into actuality by something exterior. But the imagination can sometimes intrude and cause problems here. You fear, for instance, we're in the Burragrang Valley. I think there was 5 of us. And we're going in single file. We'd crossed the Wallandilly, which was in flood. We'd waded up to our thighs in that. We'd been to visit a Hungarian farmer there. And there were 2 lads, I think, no, 3 of us and 3 girls, that was it. They're all students at the Aquinas Academy who happened to be at the same place, this holiday house. And when we went down the valley to the farmer's property, we had to cross the river from the guest house where we were staying. There was a bull in a field there. And Betty Darnell, somewhat of a comedian, Betty said, "Look at that bull, doesn't he look fierce?" Yes, he does, but there's plenty of fence between him and us. When we're coming back at night, I remember it very well, we lads took it in turns to we crossed the river, and the only way we could do it is by seeing the foam on the surface of the water. We're going across the river, all hanging on to each other, because if you slipped off your feet, you were gone. We waited over there, and the moon went behind a cloud, and here we are like this. And I remember I was in the front, and it came to a tree which was only about that wide, so I went clunk straight at the tree. Now that wasn't funny, don't laugh. But poor Betty Darnell at the back, she says, "I heard a noise. I know it's the bull. It's the bull. I know it's the bull." Imagination just took complete control. That's where we make errors. Imagination coming into it. I'm sorry, Dennis.
This statement you have about perceptions of special objects free from error by Aristotle, this is...
I beg your pardon, where is that?
This is the top of 26, the very top. So does this say that...
Oh, sight, it must see red if there's red there to be seen. Hearing, if you hear a sound, hear the sound, you don't know what the sound belongs to. Like Betty Darnell, she heard the sound of something, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was one of the lads in front crackled on some undergrowth or something, and she put her imagination with it, and the bull was coming after us all.
But this...
And that's not a lot of bull either.
So this is not about if the organs are defective. I mean,
that's another matter, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another matter. But what it's really saying is you can't put an object which isn't there to be seen. You can't, if there's no object of the sense, you won't see anything.
Yeah.
But imagination.
Does it only pertain to sight?
Oh no, to all the senses. I experienced this in Montreal. 40 degrees below zero. That's about what, 47 degrees below freezing point. And I experienced burning in my cheeks. Mm-hmm. You've experienced that? Burning in my cheeks. It goes through, the psychology books have this, the different ones that I've got, they show you this, how when you go through freezing stages, you go through varying stages. You start to feel a little bit of numbness, then you get hot, and then you get cold in the flesh. In freezing weather causes a strangeness there. So there can be 2 errors of the senses, 2 causes of errors rather. Only 2 causes. What are they? Either me or the thing itself. Well, the thing itself won't deceive you. It comes from within here, the deception. You know, you could sort of think you heard something like the sound at night, a movement through the bush, you heard that sound, but then your imagination interpreted what it is. Usually it's the will. The will. Either fear in the will, or anxious to get home, or you saw a blood-curdling movie and you're walking down the street and you're peering around in the dark, or you're whistling to not to scare yourself, but to take away the scaredness, all sorts of things. So it's the will usually that causes error. You see it in students' papers, anxious to fit it together, and they'll present you a beautifully covered paper. They go on to buy a special cover for the paper, and it's beautifully typed and lovely, But it's useless. When you read it, you say rubbish. But you've experienced that, haven't you, Professor Powers?
Yeah.
1,000 times. Yeah. Anyway, they try to convince you that their paper's a beautiful paper. And I remember I've given a student a low grade for a paper. And they said, "But sir, I worked all night on that." When? Last night. You got the damn job 6 weeks ago. You didn't do it. They think you're a nincompoop, some of the students at times. So,
Excuse me, could
certainly.
you clarify imagination? It can be very deceptive, it can be very wrong.
Yes.
Is it
Lead you
less
into error.
so when we're talking about creative imagination? And,
Well, even that could send you wrong, yes.
Yeah.
You know, people have invented things, so they thought, or they've written a piece of music, which I wrote. My sister, a musician, said, "That's rubbish. Where'd you get that from?" I was very proud of it. It's one of those never-ending things like, was it PDQ Bark or something?
Yeah,
Go on,
right.
that kind of thing. She said it's rubbish.
but what's a good use of the imagination?
Oh, you can use the imagination to remember things, like to
But
things.
that would be wouldn't that be under the intellect, under the control of the intellect?
Oh yes, when we try, yes, reminiscence, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We try when you're deliberately trying to do it.
I understand.
I think it was in 1942. I think I was lying in bed in Sydney, Australia, and I woke suddenly, and I didn't know what the heck. You know, something startled me. I didn't know what it was. This actually happened. So I lay there, and I'm drowsing off. You know, I have trouble sleeping like most people do today. I wish I could have drowsed off then, now like I did then. So what was that? Something woke me, and I didn't know what it was again. Now, this time I determined to lie awake. My imagination was running overtime. You know those billions of birds, parrots we've got in Australia, it's full of parrots. And budgerigars, we all had budgerigars, which are called lovebirds too. And I had a cage of them outside my window. And I found, once or twice, I found a bird in the window with its head off. Apparently it had come to the wires and a cat had grabbed it and bitten its head off. So I thought cats, and I've heard them scrambling and tearing at the wires. I've heard cats at night doing that. But this time, suddenly, boom, brrr, went the window. Brrr, went the window. Then, boom. What the heck? I sat up. Then, brrr, the window rattled. Boom. 3 Japanese midget submarines had we have submarines, yeah. One-man submarines they were. And they came into Sydney Harbour. We had a boom across to prevent submarines from getting into the harbour because that particular night there was a big American aircraft carrier in Sydney Harbour. Sydney Harbour is very big and it's allegedly the most beautiful harbour in the world, you know. Anyway, the submarine, one ran into the wire netting, which is a boom under there. And I don't think that night I'd been on the ferry boat. The ferry boat crossing Sydney Harbour, they're going all different directions, these ferry boats. And this one, they came in, they waited till the boom opened and snuck in under the, or tried to sneak in under the ferry boat. And the ferry boats are, you know, steam ships. And one blew itself up, one ran into the netting, and the other one got in, but it fired a torpedo at another ferry where the young men, 19 young Australians, were sleeping next to Garden Island, which was the headquarters for the Australian Navy. And they were after the American submarine, but they apparently got a bit mixed up when they got in there. And then, of course, depth charges. It blew one of the submarines apart. I've seen the submarine in the Australian Capital Territory, Canberra, where it's outside the War Museum. And but can you imagine what our imaginations did that night? I heard distinct noise of wire, I thought, clawing at the cage to get the birds, my lovebirds. And see, Tweety Bird's not the only lovebird. So, but this, oh golly, I'll never forget it. Everybody was out of bed, the street was full of people. What's happening? What's happening? We heard the explosions because they were firing big guns too and throwing air depth charges at the submarine. But what your imagination did that night, and then people were all in the street. What's going on? Something happening? Because we knew Japanese had been patrolling the skies nearby and they got chased out a couple of times, and submarines were patrolling off the east coast. You see, during the Second World War, the Japs wanted to get the west coast of the United States after Pearl Harbor, and they didn't find that too easy to do. So they decided to take Australia. We were lucky to have Americans and English and Free French and Australians all fighting together. So we haven't forgotten that, and there's a beautiful war memorial to the American people in Canberra. So it's imagination that takes hold and can it'll distort what's coming in from reality. It's the imagination, and we can use imagination to do creative works. All these great buildings and things, all this tremendous electronic equipment that people have got. Look at what Mr. Venari used to bring and compare with what he's got now. How we've been, this miniaturization that's taking place. Creative imagination. That's what makes great artists and great thinkers different, and even great orators. Well-disposed internal senses make a person a good singer or will make them a good orator, particularly a good orator and a good writer. So, well, we'll stop for a break, and you're all welcome to have coffee.
And eat all the cookies.
No, reminiscing.